My daughter I'm not going to see again. And it's school safety. It's not about gun laws right now.
Thank you for leading this country. You're a great leader. This solution is not going to be a singular thing. It's going to be multifaceted.
We're fighting hard for you, and we will not stop because the world is watching.
Breaking overnight. An attacker blows himself up after throwing a grenade at the U.S. Embassy in Montenegro.
It appears ICE is following through on its message to the Golden State that it better hold on tight after declaring sanctuary state status.
You know, I'm not running a popularity contest. I wouldn't be in this job. I mean, we're enforcing the laws enacted by Congress.
Nancy Pelosi, here's her alternative to building a wall.
Let's talk about mowing the grass so that people can't be smuggled through the grass.
Hello, CPAC. How y'all doing? To have the president back and the vice president back 2 years in a row, this is history.
Live from New York City, it's Fox and Friends for a very busy Thursday. Come on in, Dave, the camera guy with the big camera. Yesterday was fantastic. Here in New York City,
great weather.
We hit 80 degrees, if you can believe it.
It's wonderful.
In the middle of February.
Right. I think somehow the Earth got a little closer to the sun yesterday. I'm going to go over it in the break with everybody.
I know what channel you've been watching.
Yeah, I know. And then in a couple of weeks, we'll be back to 5 degrees. But
tomorrow,
we could
it's
five?
Thursday, guys. Downhill to the weekend now.
I know. It's great.
Right, but what a week.
Yeah. No kidding. We're going to talk more about the life and times of Billy Graham throughout the program. But the big live event yesterday was in the state dining room of the White House, where the president had a listening session with survivors of that shooting last week down in Florida. Also, the parents of children who were killed at Columbine and Sandy Hook. And it was so raw and so powerful. That's the father who lost a child at Columbine.
And then that lady, she
had to watch it.
She lost her child at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas.
Yeah, Betsy DeVos was there, as well as the Vice President of the United States. And what you see is, what people are beginning to realize is the president is great when he can act like the president. In the unscripted situations, you hear over and over again, when the doors are closed and the president's at these meetings, whether it's when he was campaigning or in his first 13 months, 12 months as president, that's where he excels. And now he's saying, bring in the camera so you could see him in action. That's exactly what we saw yesterday. If you missed it, here are some of the moments we wanted to share with you.
All the school shootings. It doesn't make sense. Fix it. Should have been one school shooting, and we should have fixed it. And I'm pissed because my daughter I'm not going to see again. She's not here. So we all work together and come up with the right idea, and it's school safety. It's not about gun laws right now.
I would just like to say thank you for leading this country. You're a great leader, and I appreciate the direction that the country is going in. We all need to realize that we all have different points of views, and that this solution is not going to be a singular thing. It's going to be multifaceted. This is not just Parkland anymore. This is America. This is every student in every city and everywhere. It's everybody.
There needs to be a significant change in this country because this has to never happen again. And people should be able to feel that when they go to school, they can be safe. And because there needs to be a change.
What great young individuals. They're so strong. Talking to the president, could you imagine everything they've gone through and going into the White House and sitting down with the leader of the greatest country in the world and telling him how he can affect change.
And the first father we saw, Andrew Pollock, Meadows' father, who said he was really PO'd, was so powerful. He has been through a lot. Not only did he lose his daughter last week, but he was photographed holding an image of her on his smartphone, looking for his daughter that day. And he was eviscerated because he was wearing a Trump shirt at one point. He was a Trump supporter, but there he was yesterday, speaking on behalf of everybody who lost somebody and saying, look, put the politics aside. Just figure out how to fix this thing and do it now.
Because you got mental health, you have school safety, and you want to visit what's the best way to keep guns out of the hands of lunatics, no matter where you stand. And I think the NRA feels just as strongly as the most fervent Democrat. The president spoke up yesterday, and he talked about a few things. Let's listen.
We're going to do something about this horrible situation that's going on. We're going to all figure it out together. We're going to be very strong on background checks, very strong emphasis on the mental health of somebody.
It's called concealed carry, where a teacher would have a concealed gun on them. It would no longer have a gun-free zone.
Next week, the governors are coming in from most of the states, and we're going to have a very serious talk about what's going on with school safety. We're fighting hard for you, and we will not stop. We will not stop. We're going to get there. Thank you for pouring out your hearts, because the world is watching, and we're going to come up with a solution.
That's what people wanted to hear. We're going to come up with a solution. To the White House's credit, they allowed the media to run the whole thing. Sometimes they would not allow the cameras on a live event like that, but they did. And it was so raw. And, you know, I'm sure some members of the media thought, okay, so many people have been so upset over the last week, somebody's going to stand up and start yelling at the president. You know, you're responsible for this. Nobody did anything like that. They were all respectful. There were a number of people who disagreed with the president. There was the fella by the name of Mark Barden, whose son was killed at Sandy Hook, and he said, Mr. President, I don't like the idea of more guns in school. But the president made a good case. If it takes 10 minutes to get the police to a school where there's a shooting, if some member of the faculty is armed, you can perhaps stop it.
Well, the president said he wants to strengthen the background checks for gun purchasers. He wants to put a strong emphasis on mental health. He also has considered banning bump stocks and possibly not allowing kids under the age, I think 20 or 21, to buy assault rifles.
Any guns.
Any guns, okay. And then allow leaders, like in schools, teachers, faculty, that kind of thing, to conceal and carry. And the kids at the school won't know who's carrying.
Yeah, there was also there was some walkouts and protests in Florida, as you know, in Illinois, in Colorado. They went up to their state houses. So I want to know what you think about the way the president handled it. What you like to see come from this? Because regardless of what party you vote for, what candidate is yours, what state you live on, we do want to be able to send children to school and not get shot to death.
We all think about our own kids in this situation, Democrat, Republican. This crosses all party lines. I think the message this week has been keep America safe, keep our kids in schools safe. We're talking about the border a lot this week. The ICE director says when it comes to keeping America safe, this is not a popularity contest. He was on with Shannon Bream last night. Listen to this.
I'm not running a popularity contest. I wouldn't be in this job. I mean, we're enforcing the laws enacted by Congress. We don't conduct raids. We conduct a targeted enforcement operation. We don't go in neighborhoods knocking on a bunch of doors looking for people different than us. Every person we arrest, we know exactly who we're going to arrest. We know exactly where we're going to arrest them based on a lot of intelligence, a lot of investigative work.
And you know what they started yesterday is they started work on 2 miles of new border wall in Calexico, California, which is about 100 miles to the east of San Diego. And what they're trying to do, obviously, is just remind people we need a big, big wall. Although Nancy Pelosi, Brian, can you figure out what she was talking about when she sat down with the Arizona Republic newspaper yesterday?
I'm going to need some help. Let's let the people listen, and maybe you could tell us what she means.
Let's sit down and talk this through and see what makes sense, not some commitment to a promise that we're going to build a wall and Mexico's going to pay for it. That's never going to happen. But let's talk about where a more serious structure might be necessary, where fencing will do, or mowing the grass so that people can't be smuggled through the grass, and that's something about levees, technology, personnel.
Yeah, I give up.
So who needs a great big wall when all you really need is a Toro?
Right, absolutely.
Hello.
So, by the way, does this tell you how clueless she is? If there's any place where it shows the wall works, it's San Diego. If there's no one that could argue with the stats that show what that wall has done and why the barrier is being bolstered, as Steve just mentioned. That's where they're going to be investing, make it a little bit higher, a little bit stronger immediately. They have money to start on that area. And a couple of things. This is the showdown. The reason why we're talking about this now, with the ICE director on with Shannon and the Congresswoman from California, is because between the homeless situation and the rash of sanctuary cities that's become a sanctuary state, it's a showdown between ICE enforcing federal laws and this state deciding that they know more and illegals matter more than their everyday citizens.
Do you mean a showdown or a mow-down?
Well, you don't know. Play it at home.
Nancy Pelosi
change the graphics.
Up. That's going to keep us safe. There goes a John Deere right over there.
Right.
I think Nancy Pelosi needs to go down to the border because at least the area where I was, where you were too, the grass was pristine. It was short. It was mowed. It was really pretty, actually.
What do you think
I know
she
the
means?
border's long. I know every area is different, but where we were, the grass was mowed. They use cameras to detect motion sensors in the middle of the night to detect if there's anyone that's crossing the border. As soon as they notice that someone's crossing or going through the grass in the tall grass areas, they're on them immediately.
I think that's what she's talking about. Get rid of the tall grass. All right. Meanwhile, it's about 6:10 here in New York City, and Jillian joins us with Fox News Alert.
That's right. Good morning to you guys, to you at home as well. We do have some news that we're following that's breaking overnight, so let's get you caught up on this. An attacker blows himself up after throwing a grenade at the U.S. Embassy in Montenegro. No one else was hurt, and there is no major damage to the building. Right now, embassy officials are working with police to identify the suspect and a motive. Police officers lining the streets saluting a Maryland police officer who made the ultimate sacrifice. The second cop murdered in just 12 hours. Corporal Mushahid Ramzadeen was off duty when he was shot and killed trying to help a woman threatened by her estranged husband.
He was not working, needing help. He immediately responded to that plea for help, but he saved her life by giving his own.
Ramzadeen was a Marine Corps veteran, a 14-year veteran of the force and Medal of Valor recipient. He leaves behind a wife and 4 children. His death coming shortly after Alabama officer Justin Bila was shot and killed in the line of duty. The garbage truck smashed by an Amtrak train carrying Republican lawmakers attempted to cross the tracks after the gates came down. One person inside the truck was killed in that accident in Virginia last month. A final report on the crash is still being worked on. Neighbors claim the gates malfunction often. Details released on funeral services for Billy Graham as the world mourns his loss.
God very seriously, but he never ever took himself too seriously, and I think that gave him a humanness that was very, very relatable.
His legacy, though, really is not so much in looking back, but it's looking forward, not only for him in eternity, but the fact that he has poured his life into so many people.
Profound gratitude to God that this man showed up on planet Earth to point the way to millions of people to the knowledge of Christ.
The public will be able to pay respects at the Billy Graham Library in North Carolina on Monday and Tuesday. A private funeral is scheduled for next Friday, and I'm sure it is going to be flooded with people.
I got a feeling you're right.
And they have a few keynote speakers to choose from
Just a
to
few.
eulogize.
I think everyone would love that honor.
Love that opportunity and the honor. Yep.
All right, thanks, Jillian. All right, 13 minutes now after the hour. A shocking plot just revealed. ICE is trying to take down a passenger plane. Now hackers help thwart that attack.
And the doors just opened on CPAC. What can we expect? Russia, Russia, Russia. Organizer Matt Schlapp explains next. The annual Conservative Political Action Conference, better known as CPAC, kicks off today, and the president's agenda, accomplishments, and even Russia all expected to take center stage. Here with more of what we can expect, CPAC organizer Matt Schlapp joins us from National Harbor, across the river from Washington, D.C. Matt, good morning to you. Why is Russia going to be at the top of the agenda of what you want to talk about at CPAC?
Well, actually, our attendees do want to talk about Russia. They want to talk about Russia being a threat to the United States. And they do want to talk about this investigation about supposed collusion because they think after a year, it's time for the special counsel's team to show the American people what they found. It seems like, from our perspective, they got a whole lot of nothing to show.
Well, here's one of the things, and the president, I know, was tweeting about it yesterday. The more we realize what was going on, the Obama administration, including the president of the United States, knew that the Russians were meddling with our election. And yet, They didn't do anything, apparently, to stop it, aside from him telling Putin, hey, knock it off. So the president tweeted out yesterday, why aren't they looking into what the Obama officials may have done wrong at the time?
Well, this is something that, we have said over and over again is when you have a president of the United States use the intelligence structures and organizations of the United States to spy on political opponents, we're in a very dangerous position. The person who allowed that to happen was President Obama and his senior team. I'd like to know what he knew and when he knew it, to borrow a phrase from another presidential scandal. And it's true that Obama did not keep us safe. He loved to raise the charges against Donald Trump and this supposed nefarious collusion, which there's no evidence of. But he was the one that allowed it to happen, as you say, Steve. So right. I think someone ought to bring the president in and start to scrutinize what his policies were, because they did not keep us safe.
All right. Speaking of the president, the current president is going to be in attendance at CPAC over your 3-day event. What did you make of the listening session he held yesterday in the state dining room of the White House with some of the survivors and family members of school violence?
I thought it was an incredibly important moment for our country and for his presidency. It's very important that the president be a consoler-in-chief to reach out to people when they're hurting. I think people are very much hurting in this community, the victims' families, and the president has a great capacity to try to listen and to try to think about ways to solve problems. And I think he demonstrated that yesterday. I think it was important for the American people. There are just times, Steve, when it just shouldn't be about politics. It should be about helping Americans, and I think that's what the president was trying to do yesterday, and I thought it was riveting. It was indeed. All right. Matt Schlapp, we know you get a busy 3 days. Thank you very much for joining us today from National Harbor, Maryland. Thanks for having me on, Steve. You bet. All right. What do you think about that? Email us, friends@foxnews.com. All right. 6:20 now here in New York. He lost his hand in Iraq, and now his son is making him a new one. The incredible true story is coming up, giving Dad a hand. And we are remembering the life and legacy of Billy Graham. Our spiritual panel salutes the man who died yesterday at the age of 99.
Glad you're up. Please get dressed. Here are your headlines while you get dressed. More than 24 people, including 2 Americans, hurt when a fireball ripped through a ferry. Look at this video. Oh, my goodness. It almost looks like a movie. You can see the debris flying over the sides of the ship, the ferry letting off passengers in Mexico's Playa del Carmen resort town. There goes that vacation. We move on. No one is seriously injured, by the way, in the blow-up, by the way. A sinister ISIS plot to blow up a plane thwarted by a group of elite hackers. This according to Prime Minister of Israel's Defense Forces, helping stop a bombing on board a flight from Australia over to Dubai. They tipped off Australian authorities over the summer. 4 men have been arrested. Meanwhile, let's go over the wire and to the panel. There's Ainsley.
Thank you, Brian. This morning, we are remembering prominent Christian evangelist Billy Graham, who died at the age, on Wednesday, yesterday, of 99 years old. America's pastor preached to millions of people around the world and to more live audiences than anyone in history. Here now to talk about his legacy, evangelist and founder of Pulse Movement, founded it in college down there at the end, and a friend of Billy Graham, serves on the Evangelistic Association of Billy Graham's family. That's Nick Hall on the end. And Every Nation Church NYC pastor, also planted 30 different churches around the country, Ron Lewis, who's sitting in the middle, and author of upcoming book, Learning to Speak God from Scratch. It comes out in August. That's his 4th book. Jonathan Merritt, who's published more than 3,000 articles. Thank you so much, guys, for being with us.
Thank you.
We wanted to call in the experts who knew Billy Graham or who really looked up to him in your service, in your ministry, and in your writings. So, Nick, I'll start with you down at the end. You were preaching the word of Christ on your campus and decided to start the Pulse Movement, and that you graduated in 2006. Is that right?
That's correct, yeah.
How did, we were talking about yesterday, Billy Graham, we're all amazed that we're all so sad that he died. And one of my friends said, you know what, Ainsley? He was 99. You know, when I thought, gosh, you're right. He lived such an enriched, long life and influenced so many people, even college students. What was it about this 99-year-old that we all looked up to, even college kids today?
Well, I had a friend of mine yesterday who said it well. He said, Billy taught us how to leave the 99 and go after the one. And just this heartbeat that that Billy loved people. He cared. And there was a relentless pursuit in his life that was about Jesus. It was about a message. You couldn't get him off that message. And I think as a generation, we see so many people that get sidetracked by politics or social issues or different causes. And Dr. Graham really represented just a singular focus on an invitation to know the person of Jesus. And then you see the movement around that. I mean, he multiplied himself time and again, raising up ministries, organizations, movements. I was a young evangelist who the Graham team pegged, 10 years ago. They invested in my life. They took me around the world with them. I carried bags for them and learned under them. And now we're trying to do the same things. I mean, we have a stadium event in May where we're trying to rally a generation in Minneapolis. The last stadium event was there 30 years ago when Dr. Graham was there. Same thing in Texas, trying to train a generation, hundreds of thousands. I just think the legacy of his life was so focused on the hope of the gospel, the good news of Jesus, and he was just an ambassador.
Yeah. Ron, you've planted 30-plus churches, or 30 I read on your website. You have a big church here in New York City. You're from Chapel Hill, and you have a heart. You had a heart for college students, and then you just started planting these churches. Was he your role model? Because we're seeing more and more of this. When I was growing up, it was a pastor was with one church, and now we're seeing people who come out of college and they're planting 30 different churches because they have this they want people to know Christ, and it's not about staying at one church anymore. How did he influence you?
That's a great question, and I was privileged as I think I was in between my freshman and sophomore year in college to go to a conference with a lot of students in Urbana, Illinois. It was called Urbana. And they told me that a guy named Billy Graham would be the keynote speaker, and I really didn't know. I didn't grow up in a Christian family, so I didn't know what that would be like. And in the middle of his message, it was surreal, because it was as if he and I were in a living room, and there were thousands of people, and he was just talking right in my heart.
Really?
And it was at that moment that my life was put on a different trajectory, a different course. And he had a major impact on my life, but just because of the change of the course of direction. It was like a father speaking to a son, and it was through there that my whole trajectory and calling changed.
Yeah, Jonathan, he brings up a good point. He had a way of transcending race, denomination, politics. Never talked about his politics. All he wanted to do was tell people about the love of God.
Yeah, it's really difficult to quantify just how impactful Billy Graham is as a figure in American public life. It's estimated that he preached to over 200 million people in over 150 countries. Publishers Weekly came out yesterday with a survey. 1 in 6 Americans say that they read a Billy Graham book. That's more than 50 million Americans who've been impacted by him. But what I think is most fascinating about the legacy of Billy Graham is that if you walk into Heartland America, into a room of any size crowd, and you ask people if they know of or were impacted by Billy Graham, you're going to hear stories just like Ron's story. Everybody has that story in every community where they were touched by this man and where he changed the trajectory of their life. And I think there are few religious leaders in particular in American public life that you can say that about. That's pretty remarkable.
Yesterday, it's amazing how his death has impacted all of us. I'm sure book sales have gone up. And all the girls in my Bible study, we were all texting each other yesterday saying, this is not about us anymore. We've got to get out in the community. We've got to get in homeless shelters and hold these crack babies in the hospital and tell them they're loved. Like, it's not about us. It's about spreading the gospel.
Right.
And I think we get so selfish and caught up in our own lives, and we realize now, because of his passing, we got to do better.
I think it's really a passing of the baton. I think there was a legacy that was left behind. And obviously we know Billy Graham as the hero, the legend, this great man. But you look at the story, and this is a farm boy from North Carolina who just said yes.
The least of these.
Yeah, he just said yes. And I think that's what God's looking for, is us to go.
Nick, Ron, Jonathan, thank you so much.
Thank you.
We ask, who's going to be the next Billy Graham? We all will be. We all need to spread the word. Thank you, guys. Pleasure. Well, his daughter was killed in the Columbine shooting, and this was his message at the meeting with the president yesterday.
We must create a culture of connectedness. We must create a culture in which our classmates become our friends.
That brave father, he's going to join us live next. And for today's Daily Double, Jeopardy host Alex Trebek has a new gig. What is it? It's coming up. We'll tell you.
Years ago, I went through what some of the folks here are going through now because my beautiful daughter, Rachel, was killed. And my son, Craig, was in the library that day. 2 of his friends were murdered beside him. He lay there covered in their blood, looking down the barrel of 2 guns aimed at him, and he knew he was going to die.
But the shooters got distracted. That was Darrell Scott speaking of his daughter, Rachel, the first Columbine shooting victim, and an emotional listening session with President Trump yesterday at the White House.
Here now is Darrell Scott. Darrell, thank you so much for being with us.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome. I'm so sorry for your loss. I know your daughter's story. Many of our audience might not have ever heard it. Would you share? I know that your daughter said yes. What did she say yes to? Tell us what happened on that day.
Well, Rachel left our family with 6 diaries, and we've built a program around her writings and her life that has reached over 28 million young people across America over the last 19 years. She was one of the students that was asked if she believed in God, and we know from the young man who was beside her, who's in a wheelchair for the rest of his life, that she was asked if she still believed in God, and she said, "You know that I do." But our focus has been not so much on her last words as her life and her writings and her kindness. And that's what we present in schools. We do school assemblies, school trainings. We've seen 7 school shootings prevented because of Rachel's story. And we see about an average of about 3 suicides prevented every single week. So her life counted.
Absolutely. Darrell, what did you feel after you left the listening session with the president yesterday?
Well, I left with hope because I told my wife a few days ago, I really feel like this horrible shooting in Parkland is, I really feel like there's a change in the air. And I heard, a lot of different opinions were shared. And some people focus on gun control, some on metal detectors, and our focus has been on connecting students. And Billy Graham had a mentor by the name of Norman Grubb. Norman happened to be a mentor in my life. Norman was a World War I veteran, and he taught our family something that we teach children. He said, learn to be a see-througher and not a look-at-er. Don't look at people. Don't look at your circumstances, but learn to see through them. And on the worst days of your life, you'll find purpose and meaning if you're a see-througher, not a look-at-er. And that's just one of many lessons we teach children.
So if you want something to come out, and one of the first things people want to do is quickly solve it. Like there's a button or a switch, you could just flip it and then we go. But when you look at where we've always had guns in this country, we've always had a lot of guns in this country, but ever since Columbine, of the last 19 years, we've had, 200 school shootings and 400 kids shot. So what's changed and what can we do?
Well, since Columbine, of course, the internet has become a big issue. Children have a lot of their interaction is I can go into a school and see 5 children sitting there talking to each other, but they're not looking at each other. They're communicating on the internet. Yeah. And I think the adults have got to catch up with a lot of that because that's where a lot of their communication comes from. But a lot of things that have changed since then has been more exposure to violence, I think, by young people because they have access to so much information. But I really believe the solution is long-term. I believe it didn't come overnight. The problem didn't come overnight. The solutions won't come overnight. But we've got to look at every facet of this, not just one facet.
All right. Darrell Scott, the founder of Rachel's Challenge. Sir, thank you very much for sharing your story today.
Thank you, Mr. Scott.
Thank you.
All right, let's hand it over to Jillian, who has some headlines for us. Good morning.
Good Thursday morning to you guys, to you at home as well. Let's get you caught up with some of your other stories that we're following, starting with this. Police release heart-stopping video showing officers killing an armed suspect. We do want to warn you, though, you may find it disturbing.
He's reaching! He's reaching!
Seattle police say the suspect broke into someone's home, stole their car at gunpoint, and shot at officers before crashing, as you saw in that vehicle and that video. They found this pistol in the back seat. ESPN's Jemele Hill isn't backing down after calling President Trump a white supremacist on Twitter last September. She appeared on The View, doubling down.
I still stand by what I said. I don't think that his supporters are white supremacists. What I would say, though, is that they have the privilege, the benefit of privilege, to be able to distance and disassociate themselves from certain issues.
Hill was suspended after that tweet about the president and another about national anthem protests, later leaving the flagship show SportsCenter. She now writes about sports and race for ESPN website called The Undefeated. One high schooler in Missouri is giving his dad a hand. Robbie Fry's mission to build a 3D printed arm for his father injured in an RPG attack in Iraq. His first model allowed his dad to play video games, but after some tweaking, Robbie's newest model lets him throw a ball.
As soon as I start to test different alternatives, I start to narrow in on something. It's sort of more discovering than inventing, I guess, in a way.
How cool is that? The new 3D arm even has full finger movement. That's a look at your headlines, guys. I'll send it back to you. Pretty incredible.
That's a smart kid. 3D printer and a lot of know-how. Wow. All right.
Thank you, Julian.
I can't even add toner to our printing.
No, I know.
I mean, still.
Thank goodness.
I have to call 3 people, and they got to call 3 people.
You're not alone.
Meanwhile, it was a beautiful day here in New York City yesterday, and Janice Dean.
Who won the bet?
I
what
did.
was it? What was the... Well, we didn't say, like, you said 72.
I said it would be at least 72.
At least 72? Yeah. And then you said 68?
He said no.
You said 72.
No, you said I'm going with 72. I said I'm going with 70. He's going with 68.
Right.
But what was it?
77.
78.
78.
78 degrees, but let's
All right,
take a
so
look.
Steve wins.
So it
like
was
Price is Right for getting closest.
All right,
right.
he does. I buy everybody coffee, but I just want to point out it was 65 degrees at JFK, which is where I kind of live close to. So if you take that into account, then I won.
Wow.
Brian
Everyone wants to live near an airport.
All right, let's take a look at that. I mean, we shattered records. It was 82 in D.C. yesterday, but that's all changing right now as that cold front moves through. And unfortunately, we have the potential for rain, freezing rain, sleet, which of course we will talk about throughout the day today, and some snow across the central U.S. So that 78-degree heat is long gone. It will be back in May. Back to you.
All right, very good. And she is buying coffee.
I buy coffee for everybody this
You
week.
know,
as long as it's not from the airport.
Yeah, that's not known as the best. But by the way, she said she's buying coffee, but we don't see it, so let's not assume anything.
Okay, let's see. All right, thanks.
Hey,
Katie.
Brian's comment's the best. Everyone wants to live near an airport.
All right, but by the way, unless I'm wrong, we have a big show ahead. Amongst our guests, Alveda King. Then coming up in about an hour, Kellyanne Conway. And who better to talk to about this Russia investigation, where it might be going, than Ken Starr?
All right, once again, you're right.
Alive.
It is a great show.
Thank you.
Plus, more indictments from Robert Mueller, but will anything stick? What's his end game? The judge has some ideas. And as you can see, he's coming in for a landing.